As the old saying goes, you only get to make a first impression once. And while that's true for, say, meeting your co-workers on your first day of work, or your partner's parents, it's also true for video games, and in my opinion, equally as important to get right. Today, especially, a video game introduction has to convince us to commit to potentially 100 hours of story and gameplay. And when you're introducing players not only to new mechanics, but in some cases a whole new world, well, that's a lot to pull off. Consequently, there are those games that actually make a pretty poor first impression, only to then pull things back in a big way. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 terrible openings that almost killed great video games. Number 8, The Witcher 2. Unlike its sequel, The Witcher 2 was an unforgivingly difficult game, featuring combat that required a precise understanding of enemy types and a battle system where traps, potions, and magic all needed to be used on the fly between regular sword swings. The title aimed to punish players until they eventually mastered its mechanics. If get good was a trope, the opening would fit right in, and that would be fine. There's nothing wrong with difficult games, but this sequel in particular did an incredibly poor job of communicating how to do anything other than running straight towards your untimely death in the first few hours. Like, take a quick look online and you'll see thread after thread of people just fuming over this being potentially the worst video game tutorial ever, as the opening of The Witcher 2 became a frustrating game of trial and error just to get past the first couple of missions. Now you might be saying, hang on Josh, the opening ain't that bad, and well, you're kinda right, because it isn't now. That's because later on, in the title's Enhanced Edition, some of these issues were fixed, and they finally introduced an actual tutorial, rather than just throwing you straight to the wolves. But still, that's no real help for everyone who slogged through it initially. Number 7, Gran Turismo 7. Gran Turismo 7 is the most Gran Turismo to ever Gran Turismo. By that, I mean it has its way of doing things and you either get with it or you get out of its way. However, for anyone jumping into the series for the first time with the latest game, they're going to be leaving a little bit frustrated. That's because after you boot up GT7, one of the first things you do is take part in a music rally, then sit through an unskippable 10-minute cutscene all about the history of cars, before finally picking your first car to do races on tracks that are pretty much just a circle, going at like 60 miles per hour. To say it's not immediately thrilling is putting it lightly. And that's before you get to the slow rollout of features, the mandatory license tests, and the odd cafe car collection system that much of the game revolves around. Put simply, it takes a good few hours of this tedium before the game opens up and throws you some interesting tracks and some good cars to get behind the wheel of. But fortunately, at least the wait is worth it. Gran Turismo 7 is a great racing game, it just might as well be designed by an 80-year-old granddad who has all the time in the world. Number 6, Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. Metal Gear Solid 5's opening level plays nothing like the rest of the game. Entirely linear in its design, you're forced to crawl oh so slowly around an exploding hospital as you evade guards and attempt to mount an escape, all the while barely being able to stand due to your injuries. Now obviously, the opening is supposed to make you feel powerless, and in all honesty, that would be fine if it didn't go on for so long. See, the introductory mission can last up to an hour, and while it's thematically rich and an evocative start to the game, I mean, the cover of The Man Who Sold the World is particularly great, it's marred by how frustratingly lethargic it can be, especially on a second or third playthrough. Things do improve from there as MGS5 slowly unveils its open world, but even then, the drip-feed introduction of gameplay elements and the Mother Base hub makes this lengthy introductory sequence drag on even longer as you're shuffled into tutorial after tutorial. And let's not mention the fact that the game forces you to play this hospital mission twice either, by the way. Number 5, Days Gone. What a weird freaking game Days Gone was. This post-apocalyptic open-world zombie shooter had a lot of promise, and it is a shame that it won't get a sequel that capitalizes on the strengths of the first title. That said, you can kind of understand its lukewarm initial response by taking a look at its opening few hours, which made it appear like your generic zombie game with a gruff, boring protagonist at the helm. And that's because the opening hours of Days Gone make you feel like you're playing a game that you've played 100 times before. You're clearing out enemy outposts, fighting off the undead, and scrounging for materials so you can do the same kind of crafting that you do in all of these Sony games. It's not bad, it's just familiar stuff, and there's no real narrative hook here to offset that fact. Once you start getting upgrades though, particularly to your bike to stop it from being more of a chore than anything else, it all starts to click into place. The narrative gets a kick up the arse, main character Deacon St. John becomes a little bit more interesting, while the level of detail in the world becomes more apparent. And then there's the zombie horde, the title's key selling point in the marketing, which only arrives on the scene hours and hours in. Now, yeah, front-loading this feature may have been a mistake, but leaving it to be revealed so late does mean that Days Gone's USP isn't immediately present, which, like I said, isn't that great when you're wanting to get people in and prove that you're more than just another zombie game. Number 4, Kingdom Come Deliverance. Pretty much the game tailor-made for everyone who said, yeah, you know what, The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion was pretty good, but you know what would make it better? If it bored you to tears. Obviously, I'm just doing a bit, but Kingdom Come did make a name for itself by being almost an anti-RPG. This isn't a fantasy game where you jump in and after an hour are speaking like a dragon and everyone is hailing you as the second coming of Christ. This title puts the focus on grounded realism, where just learning how to swing a sword can be an arduous task that takes hours to perfect. As a result, the game demands a lot from you, and that goes double for the introduction. Here you start off as a nobody whose village is eventually attacked, as you play a few pranks and get into a fist-fighting tutorial that might put you off the whole thing entirely. The painstaking introduction, made worse by how little advice you're actually given, will make or break anyone on this game. Beat it at its own terms though, and you might just get one of the most unique RPGs of the last generation. Number 3, Fallout 3. The opening of Fallout 3 has famously been derided for starting out on the wrong foot. Chronicling your created character's life in the safety of Vault 101 from their literal birth, the opening hour has you going to birthday parties, dealing with bullies, and sitting exams before you eventually break out and start the game proper. As you can imagine, while this is great for establishing the world for newcomers, it's not really what people come to an open world RPG for. It's so long and so railroaded that it feels like a slog, not to mention just how tedious it gets on repeat playthroughs without the option to skip straight to the character customization screen and then out to the open world. It's the kind of sequence that only serves the narrative, a cool idea, but one that absolutely doesn't need to be as long as it is. Fortunately, the game opens up from there massively, giving players the kind of post-apocalyptic RPG experience that they came for. Number 2, Mass Effect. It's not easy to establish an entire sci-fi universe, and as a result, the original Mass Effect hits a few roadblocks its sequels would avoid entirely. First up is the opening, which introduces you to a fresh-faced Commander Shepard after a quick dose of exposition aboard the Normandy ship. The first tutorial section on Eden Prime is enjoyable enough, but it's a bit too straightforward and features fewer RPG elements when compared to the rest of the main quests. While Eden Prime is a wobbly introduction, however, it's the following sequence exploring the Citadel that really brings the game's opening hours down. Letting you immerse yourself in side quests while you move from one end of the eerily sterile hub world to the next, the game should have spent less time piling on this busy work and instead put the focus on getting you in charge of your own ship, then letting you freely explore solar systems. After all, that sense of wonder at the vastness of space is what the original Mass Effect was all about. So to spend so much time delaying access to this exploration just seemed a little bit antithetical. Fortunately, the devs got the memo though, and with the second game crafted one of the best openings of all time. Number 1, NIER Automata. NIER Automata does what it wants and it doesn't give a crap if you hate it. Case in point being the opening. A rather impressive on-rails introductory battle that initially seems cool until you die and realize there are no checkpoints and you're gonna have to replay the whole thing all over again. Likewise, once NIER Automata finally unleashes its open world, the game grinds to an immediate halt, introducing you to a myriad of mundane side quests and a main campaign that's initially comprised of doing favors for pretty much everyone you meet. Fortunately though, the decision to overwhelm the player with a large amount of seemingly innocuous side quests in NIER Slow Start does have a purpose, as it's used to introduce players to a sense of repetition and a gameplay loop that's later revealed to be more substantial and satisfying than it first appears. This is a game that's supposed to be played through 3 times after all, but unfortunately the significance and impact of its opening hours don't come to fruition until you've at least finished the first part of this sprawling RPG. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. What did you think about the introductions to these video games? And am I being a little hyperbolic? After all, these are great games, but the intros just didn't work for me. Let us know, and while you're down there, could you please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't, though, I've been Josh. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.